Crush it with Maizex canola. Maizex Seeds is 100% focused on Canadian farmers. Your source for high-performance grain, silage, and grazing corn, as well as soybeans and, new for 2026, canola. Visit Maizex.com to find your local Maizex representative.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and Realagriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Hello and welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Friday, September 12th, and I'm your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith. Sean Haney is away, but don't you worry, you're in good hands here with me. It is, of course, the Friday show, so we will have the issues panel. On today's panel, we've got Tyler McCann. He's the Managing Director of the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, also known as CAPI. And my colleague Kelvin Heppner out of Altona, Manitoba will join me for the last three segments of the show. And if you're listening to the podcast version, you also get a bonus at the end of today's show. So check that out as well. You can download that from realagriculture.com or, of course, wherever you get your audio. Also on today's show, the beef market update with Ann Wasko. So wonderful to touch base with Ann. It's always lovely when we get to chat. We don't get to talk all that much. She was traveling this week, so we did do the report a little earlier than we typically do, but I don't know that any of the numbers have changed significantly. She's got some really cool export data that we are going to unpack specifically around exports and imports for Canada and live cattle movements. So stick around right after the break and we'll hear from Ann Wasko. Of course, on today's lineup for the issues panel, I am going to ask Kelvin and Tyler all about their thoughts on the Fed Prov Territorial Ag Ministers meeting that happened earlier this week in Winnipeg. Definitely need to unpack that. Our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has rolled out the sort of first list of the national projects that are getting sort of the green light or sped forward for Canada, and where agriculture potentially lines up on that list, if at all. So definitely going to chat about that. And if we've got time, I want to ask Kelvin a very important question, and that is he going to put his name in for a piece of the class action lawsuit about bread price fixing? That's right. All the hard-hitting news here on RealAg Radio. Okay, let's take a quick break, and I'll be back with our first segment and the beef market update with Ann Wasko right after this.
Anniversaries are a time of reflection, celebration, and connection. 10 years ago, G3 set out with a vision to build something better for Canadian grain farmers. And you joined us on that journey to launch a new national network. Thank you for the relationships that made it possible. A decade of growth, a decade of connections, and more in decades to come. Connect with your farm business representative or find your closest elevator at g3smarter.ca.
Is your family farm's future uncertain? Silence might be the biggest risk of all. Discover how open conversations and gradual planning can secure your legacy and empower the next generation. Don't wait. Start the dialogue today. Learn more and download a transition planning checklist, your guide to farm succession planning, at fcc.ca/knowledge.
At Proven Seed, we know that farming in Western Canada doesn't just teach us, it shapes us. Here we face challenges with resilience, innovation, and grit born from decades of experience. We battle the conditions again and again, because growing crops here isn't just what we do, it's who we are. We're raised to adapt just like you, with varieties grown specifically for your local conditions. Visit provenseed.ca/raised to adapt to hear our story.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and joining me now for the beef market update, it's Ann Wasko. How are you, Ann?
I am good, Lyndsey. I'm good.
That's good. We don't get to do this often, so it's really lovely to get to chat with you. And, well, maybe I'm the bad news bears, but are we still on a market tear, or did we see the seasonal sort of slowing of prices after the long weekend?
Well, the latter. So a couple of things. First of all, yes, right, you mentioned seasonally. Often after Labor Day, markets take a bit of a breather. The other thing I'd point out is, of course, we've just come off of placing all-time record highs both in the U.S. and in Canada for fed cattle. So a little breather. Sometimes folks look at that as that's a healthy sign to take a breather. So now I guess time will tell, but bottom line is we're talking a little bit earlier in the week than we normally do. So we're still waiting. There's bids in Kansas being passed of 240. That would be lower than last week. So the market is appearing like it's going to trade lower. Northern, like Nebraska type trade is 238. Again, a little earlier in the week than normal, but that would be $4 lower than last week. And the dressed prices in Nebraska, $3.75 delivered, and that would be $8 lower than last week. So we've still got some time to trade some more cattle, but all indications are that, especially with the big drop in the futures market we saw earlier this week, that cash trade is also off.
Okay, but as you mentioned, maybe not all bad. It's taking a breather. It's a bit seasonal, and we are still coming off of very strong prices. What have we seen for Western Canada, Eastern Canada, as far as pricing there?
Yeah, so that market shows like it's holding steady this week, which is good because we've talked about that basis spread between Alberta and the U.S., and it's been extremely wide, even though it's been at high price levels. We've still got Canadian prices well back of the U.S. So some of this, us trading steady this week and the U.S. lower will help narrow that gap a little bit. So again, for what we've seen trade so far in Alberta this week, anywhere from 520 to 526 delivered. We're going to call that mostly steady. There's a little bit of live business that's been done at 318 to 320 FOB the feedlot, and that would be some activity in business where cattle be getting delivered into the U.S. And then Ontario also sounds like that was a steady fed cattle market this week at 542 delivered.
Mm-hmm. Now, we do like to talk trade data when we have it, and we did get some numbers that rolled in late last week. What can you tell us on, we'll start with beef and then we can talk live cattle, but what do we have for beef numbers?
Yeah, I think it's always important, Lyndsey, to talk about this trade data, especially from a Canadian perspective, because remember, half of our trade is in export, or half of our business of our beef production is export. So we talk about the record retail prices that we're seeing, and we worry about those levels sometimes, I think. How long can they last? Is it, what are we doing? But remember, the other half of our consumer is outside of the country. So important to talk about this data. So we did just get StatsCan released last week, the July beef export data. So in the month of July, we were up 10% from last year, which is a little bit different. It's only the second month this year to be higher than last year. We are running with smaller production, so you'd expect exports to also be smaller. So that's kind of good news. Year to date, we're still down 5% in our volume, but our value of our beef exports are up 6%. So again, a reminder that when we move products, especially to some of the Asian type markets, we're looking at record retail and wholesale prices, and that's certainly playing back into the value of our beef exports. So that's a good news story. Just to break it down, I think we're up 10% into the U.S. in July. We're up 15% into Japan and up 9% into Mexico. So it's not a one-horse wonder, if you will. I mean, all three of our key markets were up. And again, that's while our beef production in Canada is down 5%. So I think standing back from a big picture perspective, that's maybe data I wasn't really expecting to see.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about imports? Because, of course, that's exports.
Yeah. And we know we're short of import product, or we're short of lean trim product, and so we are importing more product. That goes kind of hand in hand when you're at this phase of the cattle cycle. So our imports, and this is for August, so I'll just clarify, we're talking about one more month of data. Imports in August into Canada were up 5%, and every month this year has been up. So that's on trend. Year to date, we're sitting up 19%. And again, the big players year to date from the U.S. were down 3%, but the big increases are, of course, Australia and New Zealand. We've talked about that every month as well. Australia up 52% and New Zealand up 46%.
Now, what about live cattle movement? This one always fascinates me. I'm always surprised.
Yeah, and it's interesting, especially here in 2025, because we exported so many cattle in that first quarter ahead of the tariff, rate announcement. That was an unknown that we were also worried about. So, considering the numbers that went south in the first quarter of this year, things have really quieted down ever since. So, our fed cattle exports in July were actually down 20%. Our cow exports are down 60% just for the month of July. And again, it's showing you that, first of all, our cow slaughter is running low, and so their packers are certainly trying to keep everything they can for harvest in Canada. Feeder cattle exports bounced a little bit in July, but it's such a small number. Year to date, we're still running up 14%. And that all goes back to the big movement we saw back in the first quarter of this year.
Okay. That 60%, did that surprise you a little bit? That's a big number.
It did, but again, it's July and it's a small, we're not in most areas. I know we've got drought in a lot of areas still in Western Canada, but generally speaking, we didn't see a big run of cows to town, and that showed up in both our domestic slaughter as well as this export data.
Okay. All right. Fascinating numbers. Okay, Anne, thank you so much, of course, as always, bringing us the beef market update. Really appreciate it. We'll talk to you again in a few weeks.
Okay. Thanks, Lyndsey. Have a good weekend.
We are going to take a quick break here on RealAg Radio, and I'll be back with the issues panel right after this. Protect your anhydrous ammonia application earlier than normal this fall. Defend against potential losses and protect your bottom line with new Centuro A-Pro Nitrogen Stabilizer. Patented active ingredient pronitridine offers agronomically effective protection where it matters most, below ground. The new concentrated formulation lowers application rates. Start early with Centuro A-Pro as part of your nitrogen management plan. Contact your local retailer or visit centuro.ca for more information today.
The Canola School on Realagriculture.com is a video series that showcases the latest in canola research and production agronomy. Learn from some of the best at your own pace through quick and timely producer-focused videos available on our YouTube channel. The Canola School on Realagriculture.com is the quickest way to keep up to date on all the latest in canola production. Boost your canola IQ with the Canola School, brought to you by BASF, and visit canolaschool.com.
Built on over 100 years of seed innovation and unwavering commitment to farmers, Pioneer 100 Series canola hybrids deliver a step change in yield performance and agronomic traits. This isn't just better canola, it's different canola. Pioneer 100 Series. Contact your local Pioneer sales representative or visit pioneer.com/100 series to learn more today.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Friday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and dairy producers are wanted for the very first American Dairy Expo, November 5th and 6th at the Champlain Valley Exposition in Vermont. Grab a free breakfast, tour the 200 Company Dairy Innovation Trade Show, meet Olympian and dairy producer Elle St. Pierre, and take in the Dairy Delivers classroom. Full details, discount coupon, and pre-expo tickets are available at AmericanDairyExpo.com. That's XPO.com. It is time for the Friday Issues panel. We've got Kelvin Heppner out of Altona, Manitoba, and Tyler McCann out of, near Ottawa, Ontario, but maybe Quebec. Who knows? We'll find out. Kelvin, I'll bring you in first. You got rained on this week.
We did get a little bit of rain here again the last couple days. A little bit north of us received another, 4, 5, 6 inches, I'm hearing. So there's definitely some flooding in the fields and even in some basements in towns here. We're at a standstill. We had a couple good days of canola harvest this week. Fought some lodged canola after last week's rains. That wasn't a lot of fun, but made some progress. We're on a rain delay again here the last day.
Mm-hmm. Where was this back in June, is what I would like to say. All right, and also joining us, as I mentioned, Tyler McCann. He's the managing director of CAPI. Tyler, what has kept you busy this week?
Well, so I'm actually in Ottawa today, not in Western Quebec. So right there. I like life has returned back to normal a bit after Labor Day. I feel like this is our first real week of work as everybody's trying to get things figured out. So just trying to stay on top of what looks like it's going to be a pretty busy fall when it comes to ag policy, or hopefully busy fall.
Yeah, hopefully. Monday, of course, Parliament resumes, so it will be a busy weekend at the airport this weekend. Everybody coming back. We also had Kelvin. I assume everyone bunked at your place. We had the FPT meeting happened in Winnipeg. Initial thoughts out of that meeting. I feel like it happened, but I don't know that there was anything earth-shattering that came out of it.
I think that's an accurate take. There were a lot of updates and reports and reaffirmations of previous decisions or statements that the ministers, the federal, provincial, territorial ag ministers, have made in the past, but not a lot of new decisions or actions. And Tyler talks about how we're heading into busy season here with Parliament resuming and the Carney government having promised a bunch of big things that they're hoping to accomplish in response to some of the issues on the geopolitical front, and especially our relationship with the U.S. and China. And here we had another meeting where that sense of urgency didn't seem to really be signaled coming out of the ag ministers meeting. And I know part of that is probably due to there's turnover in terms of who's attending these meetings. Some of these ministers, this is their first time. For our federal ag minister, Heath MacDonald, this is his first time attending and co-hosting the annual FPT meeting. So there is some getting up to speed that has to happen. But at the same time, if we are in this urgent situation, in an elevated level of needing to get things done and needing to get the economy fired up and going, I'm not sure we saw that coming out of the Ag Ministers FPT meeting this week.
Now, Tyler, leading up to this meeting, you did publish, and we published it on Realagriculture. You wrote a piece, a very poetic, hearkening to our summer of discontent in agriculture. And I'll be honest, when I read through it, and as I was publishing it, and I'm adding links to all the stories of all the things you called attention to as to the challenges that agriculture has gone through just in the last few months, you had pretty high expectations, I think, for this FPT meeting. Were they met?
No, they weren't. And I'll say again, because of word counts, I had to cut stuff out of my list of things that happened this summer that didn't make the final cut. I think that sometimes we can lose sight of all of the pressures that are in front of the sector and all of the challenges that we face, especially if you're farmer in across the country today, kind of trying to get through harvest. You're not thinking about kind of all of these things that come one on top of the other. But I think that there is an expectation we should have that governments are thinking about these things and governments are being prepared to act and governments are willing to do something about it. But, what we on the outside have to do is judge ministers by their press release effectively. That is the record of the decision that they're willing to make public. And I've got it here. I could quote some of it for the listeners, but I'm not sure it would add much value because there's a lot of words and very little action when I see what's there. And again, at a time when we've had a tough summer and it looks like the fall could be worse, and we need to see governments do something. There is a huge opportunity for governments to do things that will make a difference, and they seem to be reluctant to do it.
So, and Kelvin points out that yes, this is, for some, their very first meeting or they're relatively new in their role. We also had some veterans. The Quebec minister, who it was his last meeting. We'll touch on that maybe in a bit, but had been around for a while. But Tyler, to your point, while it's important that everybody's up to speed, at the same time, I personally also feel like shouldn't we have had some sort of setting up of, at the bare minimum, a setting up of here are the top 3 priorities of what we are taking action on next month or when we meet or et cetera. I feel like, okay, it's great everybody got together. This was a delayed meeting because of the fires in July. But I feel like we didn't even get a strategy going forward. Even if they didn't decide a lot, I didn't see any strategy come out either.
No, there wasn't. Kelvin mentioned the word urgent earlier. That doesn't show up in the press release anywhere. I'm not sure the word priority does either. There are things where it's always important to have kind of that realistic expectations of what ministers could do. And I'm not saying ministers needed to come out and say, here's our 10-point plan for the future of Canadian agriculture. I maybe would have liked ministers to say, we think that we should have a 10-point plan and we're going to work on that 10-point plan. They could have said, beyond what they've done on agri-stability, here's our priorities. They could have said, when it comes to trade infrastructure, here's our priorities. They could have said, these are the concrete things that we're looking for from a regulatory reform. Here are the concrete things that we're willing to do to reduce interprovincial trade barriers. Instead, we get kind of this language that's in the release about, they're respecting the Safe Foods for Canadian regulations, but continuing joint efforts on slaughter availability projects. Like, I know that it's tough to try and find language that everybody can agree to, but boy, it would be nice if we had ministers more clearly saying, these are the things that we're working for. These are the expectations that you, the industry, can expect. And this is the role that we want to play to support the growth, success of Canadian agriculture. And I just don't think that we get it. And I guess I'm starting to lose my patience with, yes, these are new ministers. They're getting up to speed. Minister McDonald's would have been, I think, 120 days that he's been in the role. These governments provincially have been around for a long time. Mm-hmm. I think everyone needs to do a better job of holding ministers to account. And I will just say, I think in general, we don't put enough focus on these FPT meetings. These are opportunities for action. And I think that the farmers, their associations, industry associations need to do more to say, we want ministers to come together and agree and act on things. And often that doesn't happen.
Kelvin, on that point, Tyler brings up a few of the things that I'm actually surprised we didn't get more about. So interprovincial trade being one of them. The current situation with canola and China's tariffs on canola, which of course dovetails into a discussion on business risk management programs. What, Kelvin, did you hope we might see on a list? So if they had come out with, their top 3 or 4 priorities, what would you have expected or hoped would have been on that list?
To me, just more concrete actions, I would say, in terms of changing programs and showing that there is a recognition. And I think the press conference at the end of the meeting, the wrap-up press conference, it certainly was clear that they acknowledge that there is a farm profitability issue across the country and that the China tariffs are taking a major toll. Those maybe weren't clear things outlined on the agenda, but I think those were overarching themes that they realized. And in their discussions during the 2.5 days that they were meeting, in terms of concrete items, I would say more reforms to business risk management, and like Tyler said, priorities. I know the next 5-year ag policy framework, they're set to release a policy statement or have a proposed policy statement on that next summer, and they tasked bureaucrats with coming up with priorities for that policy statement for next summer. Why not have something now already? And to me, I think we have a looming federal budget where there's potentially 15% cuts to the agriculture budget and across government. Minister McDonald could have used that as an opportunity to trigger a bunch of this stuff happening and serious discussions about government priorities and spending, where the federal government, he could have laid it on the table, and I'm not sure that this happened at all, where he could have laid his cards on the table and said, hey, this is what the federal government is doing. Provinces, how are you going to respond? How are we going to move on from this? And whether that is changes to public plant breeding funding or federal involvement, or whether that is other areas that are potentially impacted by those cuts, that potentially could have been used as a launching point, I think, for some reform discussions around different policies. So I'm not giving a lot of concrete specific examples here, but at least this was a lot of just maintaining the status quo, and we'll continue. We did see the Treasury Board this week also issue a report with over 500 different areas where the government says it's working on red tape reduction. Well, when you look at the Agriculture and CFIA, Canadian Food Inspection Agency lists, there's a lot of just inventory of things that were already happening on that list. And so not seeing a lot of bold action that the Prime Minister spoke about during the election campaign back in spring.
Tyler, on that note of the, looming budget and potential budget cuts or known budget cuts, but just where they end up, what's your sense on, Kelvin mentioned plant breeding. What's your sense on where some of this pullback may come from or end up in agriculture?
So I think that there's two important things to understand. Again, first, so ministers have been asked to say, give us your list of 15% of budget cuts. That could be staff, that could be programming. It doesn't have to be both. I think it'll be interesting to wait and see how Ag Canada and how the minister has decided to approach that. And the second thing is, apparently when the finance minister sent that first letter, he said, if you want anything new in the budget, you need to tell me how that's going to be funded internally too. And so that may mean further cuts. We saw, for example, $75 million more for agri-marketing in the PM's announcement on canola last week. There is a chance that may all need to be funded internally as well. And so that may push the cuts even further. And my sense, based on the little bits that I've heard, that program cuts are coming. I think that there is a sense that BRM will largely be insulated, but that may mean there are significant cuts other places. And I continue to think that it's unfortunate that there isn't more of a discussion around what should be protected. CAPI, we put out a report in February around how government should go through a cost-cutting exercise, but I haven't seen any other group in agriculture talking about this is what we should protect and this is what we're willing to sacrifice.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to sort of that does sort of bring us into Prime Minister Carney's announcement of the nation building projects, the first ones that have got the nod, because there's some parallels here on things that perhaps we have to be setting up for in agriculture. So let's take a quick break, and I'll be back here with the issues panel right after this.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At realagriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit realagriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit realagriculture.com/subscribe today.
The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to get your crop off to a great start and a strong finish. Whether you're growing chickpeas, faba beans, lentils, or peas, you'll get all the latest and best agronomic information at PulseSchool.com. A library of top-notch agronomy videos from industry experts available on demand at your fingertips. Visit the Pulse School, brought to you by BASF on RealAgriculture.com.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by your Co-op Grow team. You've always farmed smart. What if you had more insight? Your Co-op Grow team can help you collect, analyze, and interpret data so you can make the best decisions for your farm. Plan for success in 2026. Talk to your Co-op Grow team today. All right, bringing in our issues panel, we've got Tyler McCann with CAPI and my colleague Kelvin Heppner out of Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin alluded to it before the break. We did get Prime Minister Carney's nation-building list, our shovel-ready projects. Where did agriculture infrastructure land on this list?
Well, at first glance, there's not a lot of agriculture. When you look a little closer, there's a port terminal container project at the Port of Montreal that could benefit containerized shipments. So that's soybeans, pulses, some grain that goes through the Port of Montreal. But farm groups, Grain Growers of Canada, Wheat Growers Association have certainly issued their response to the Carney announcement yesterday by saying that where's the Port of Vancouver, where's West Coast trade infrastructure? The Port of Vancouver, of course, our country's largest port, and has several choke point bottleneck issues, and it's not on the list here. So there is an LNG project in BC, a nuclear plant in Ontario, copper mine in Saskatchewan, another mine in BC as well on the list. And a lot of these projects, people that follow them closely say they were already at or near the finish line, and this is beyond shovel ready. The Carney government did also announce 6 other potential projects that could be added to the list, and they said they would be announcing more nation-building projects before the Grey Cup. I'm not sure why the Prime Minister used the Grey Cup as his deadline, but that's November 16th. So the Port of Churchill Plus strategy is what they're calling it, which would include an all-weather road, upgraded rail line, new energy corridor, and marine ice-breaking capacity, was on that secondary list. So we could see Churchill, and that has some maybe more direct potential for grain export, agricultural exports from the prairies there. But again, not I would say doesn't compare in terms of scale to Port of Vancouver and upgrades there that farm groups would like to see.
So, right, the container movement at Montreal, obviously very important for Ontario, Quebec, soybeans, IP beans, that. So, I mean, we're not downplaying that, but I mean, that clearly isn't the biggest part of agriculture infrastructure for Canada. We'll take it, great. And even the Churchill strategy, though, as you alluded to, Kelvin, if that's next on the list, that is really an energy play, and agriculture would
minerals.
Yeah, exactly, and mineral. It's not about agriculture, but a rising tide boils all ships, right? Potentially, that's what we're grasping at straws. But Tyler, from your perspective, when you saw the list, I mean, are you surprised that there wasn't more? Is the Port of Vancouver, or what the Port of Vancouver needs, the bridge infrastructure, like actually funneling things there, has been brought up. Do you think there is a fit there in nation building projects that we're going to see funded?
So I think that there's a couple things. Going back first to the FPT meeting, I think it would have been interesting had FPT ministers on Monday said, here's our list of 5 projects that we think will benefit the sector. That's an opportunity where they could have been far more concrete than they were, but that was a missed opportunity. I don't think that the announcement this week from the Prime Minister is a missed opportunity for the sector. I think to Kelvin's point earlier, if you look at what's made the list of this first round of projects that they've identified, these are projects that are well advanced. And I think that the reality is projects to address those choke points in Vancouver aren't at the same stage. They aren't the same fit for what the Major Projects Office is intended to do. I think that the criticism from the farm groups is a little misdirected, and I'm not sure that I think that their expectations, if they were expecting kind of some of these choke point infrastructure projects to be on this list, were unfounded. I think it remains to be seen what the government is going to do on public financing of public infrastructure projects. And this really is intended to be catalyzing private sector investment. That's the words that the Prime Minister likes to use. These are projects that are largely driven by private money. Fixing those choke point issues in Vancouver, that's going to be government money, that's going to be public money. We know that the Prime Minister wants to invest more, but the reality is the fallout from the trade war with the United States is putting extra pressure on government financing. They need to spend money on other things. I think the real question in my mind is what happens in the budget, and what signal do we get about how much of taxpayers' money the government's willing to spend on these public infrastructure projects. That's the real point that I'm waiting for. I'm not surprised with how this list looked this week.
This budget is going to have a lot of heavy lifting to do. There's a lot of expectations riding on this budget.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like this is like where dollars are being spent 3-4 times. And at some point in a budget, Kelvin, like you have to account for each dollar. You don't get to just, when you give a press conference, use the same money 3-4 times. In a budget, you have to actually show where it's going to go.
Yeah, and there's also this is a rabbit trail to go down, but which party? Remember, this is a minority Liberal government. Which party is going to support the budget? That's a question mark yet to be answered. One of the issues with this Port of Vancouver infrastructure projects and upgrades that farm groups and farmers would benefit. Farm groups are calling for. If you look at this list of 5 projects, they all have private investors proponents. Mm-hmm. The bridges that are the bottlenecks in Vancouver, my understanding is they're owned by the railways, and at least publicly, we haven't seen a lot from the railways, and something that we're working on. We've contacted the railways actually for some more background info on this as to whether behind the scenes they're advocating for this, whether it seems like the federal government wants a private proponent behind these projects before putting them on the list. And like Tyler said, this would be public infrastructure. There needs to be, if there's not a private proponent, or if there is a private proponent, it would have to be the railways probably in this case. And curious how that fits into what this new Major Projects Office is looking for and what their criteria are.
And everybody knows that agriculture and railways are best buds. So that's going to go great. Okay, that was my sarcasm font for the day. But I wanted to share a few years ago, Kelvin, you'll remember this, because this week actually marks my RealAg anniversary. So when I started with RealAg. Ooh. And years ago
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. On April 1st, 13 years. But on April 1st, we did an April Fool's joke about the trouble with moving grain to port. And one of our solutions was either to catapult over the Rockies and or use drones with Tupperware containers to bring small batches across the Rockies and not have to worry about it. I mean, it's in jest, but like realistically, It is a gigantic bottleneck for moving so much product out of Canada. And we talk about the Churchill, idea, which has been around forever. Yes, mountains are difficult to cross. Yes, we have winter weather. Yes, we have all that. But Vancouver is still, and points north even of Vancouver. We have Prince Rupert and those sorts of things as well. But Vancouver is still the way to go. I mean, it is, regardless of the challenges, it's still the way to go for so much product. Tyler, go ahead.
I was going to say, so before we started to record, we were talking about who was going to tell Lyndsey she was wrong. I'm going to say, Lyndsey, you're wrong, because there's another way. There's another way to go, and that is domestic, right? And so I think that there's some interesting confluence in all of these things that are happening. Where what would address canola bottlenecks in Vancouver is if we crushed and processed that canola on the prairies. And I think if you go back to the announcement that we saw from the Prime Minister last week, that was not well received by canola groups. I think that is clearly a missed opportunity from the government to really reinforce that domestic demand for canola. And again, I think we always have this, fixation with we need to export as much as we can, but there are times when there are domestic solutions, and we need to make sure that we keep that in the mix as well.
So John Drieger, though, made an interesting point, I believe it was on Wednesday's show, market analyst with Left Field Commodity Research. And sure, the government can push more biofuel demand, but it's still a limit on our crush capacity. And our crushers, domestic crushers, those margins are good. They're going to be running at full capacity again this year. But if we don't have more crush, sure, if we can have more canola oil going into renewable diesel or biodiesel, we still need to have companies invest in more crush capacity. And there has been a huge expansion in that. I'm not sure that that's a long-term signal that you need to drive even more domestic crush capacity. There's a bottleneck there. It's not as simple as let's just put more into the biofuel demand market.
Right, of course not, Kelvin. But what we saw from the Prime Minister from the announcement was kind of steps towards some of those signals, right? So like an allusion to dealing with used cooking oil, but it seems like they're not actually that committed to dealing with the used cooking oil issue. No. They had this allusion to an incentive, but it's not enough of an incentive to increase actual demand. And so we have seen projects announced but not get off the ground. We know that there are projects that are ready to move forward if the right signals are sent. And again, I think that's part of the frustration from the canola industry is that, yes, they know that additional crush capacity needs to be built, and they hoped that announcement on Friday would have sent the signal to build that additional capacity, but it just didn't.
I want to note all the meal, though, would have to go likely to the U.S. for dairy cows. So we still need to fix that pesky little U.S. problem. Just putting that out there. Kelvin, on that point, though, we did get some clarity, but not really on the used cooking oil. So that's UCO or UCO. What clarity did we get from Environment and Climate Change on that one?
Yeah. So last week, after our show, I had the chance to interview Minister MacDonald, and in that interview, unprompted, he threw in this possibility that the amendments to the clean fuel regulations that the government is planning to make that they announced last Friday could potentially address fraudulent used cooking oil coming into the country. That's something that the canola groups have been calling for. But the Prime Minister's news release had no mention of that, and ECCC, Environment Canada, in an update to stakeholders on the same day last week, made no mention of it. And when we inquired this week with ECCC, their response is basically, we don't see any evidence of fraudulent used cooking oil coming into our country. We have systems in place for testing and verifying this, and we don't see any evidence of this, implying that this isn't an issue that needs addressing. And Minister MacDonald also, at that FPT press conference, Sean had the chance to ask him about this as well in that closing press conference on Tuesday, and he basically admitted or acknowledged that with Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe and Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister Cody Blois in China, this is a sensitive time to be talking about this, and they don't want to upset the Chinese further by threatening to block used cooking oil imports into Canada. And so certainly there is geopolitical sensitivities to talking about this as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And this is why we end up in a world where we don't want to upset the Chinese. We don't want to upset the Americans. It seems like the only people we are willing to upset are canola farmers. And I'm not sure that that's a great place to be.
Let's leave it there. Well, I'll just sit with that a moment.
Tyler with the mic drop.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Excellent point. We're going to take a quick break here on the Issues Panel, and we'll be back with more right after this quick break.
Season 4 of the Dirt Podcast is here, and we've got a lot to talk about. From soil fertility to market outlooks, join me and a variety of industry experts as we dig into topics that will help you make better business decisions on your farm. This season, we're also introducing an Ask an Agronomist segment where we'll be answering some of your biggest questions and having some fun along the way. Listen to The Dirt on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or visit nutrient-economics.com.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on realagriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on realagriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. This segment is brought to you by the Economics Podcast. From nutrient management to the latest weather, market, and ag trends, The Dirt, an economics podcast, is your place for farm smart topics to boost your profitability. Join Mike Howell on Season 4 of The Dirt Podcast, available now at nutrient-economics, that's economics with a K, .com. All right, we bring them in for one last segment here. It's Tyler McCann, Kelvin Heppner. Kelvin, we last week, of course, were chatting about all sorts of things happening, including the Premier of Saskatchewan's trip to, so Scott Moe headed to China, Parliamentary Secretary to the PM, Cody Boyce, also went on said trip. Have we got a full report, a wholesome report of who they met with and what they did, or what did we get so far?
If you use the word China in a sentence, I'm not sure you can use the word wholesome, fulsome report in that term in the same sentence. But we did get a bit of an update on who they met with during this trade mission, this trade delegation to China, aimed at again addressing the tariffs on agricultural exports, including canola. They met with China's Executive Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs and China's Vice Minister of Commerce, along with some other government officials. So not necessarily the highest up people in government, but I don't think there was any expectation of that. And certainly I would say this is a better result than last November when then Agriculture Minister Lawrence McCauley quietly went to China and wasn't able to get any meetings, from our understanding, with official government people. He met with some industry stakeholders, interlocutors, I believe was the term that the government used at the time. So there's, I guess, signs of engagement, at least from the Chinese government, with meeting with officials here. And the Prime Minister's updates on this report said that the visit paves the way for further, quote, constructive engagement to find pragmatic solutions to shared trade concerns. So it sounds like doors are at least open and communication channels are at least open coming out of this. So that is certainly better than it could be.
Now, so Tyler, I'm not super up to speed on all the ranking officials, etc. But we did at least get some names and titles this time around. We did hear, though, so Rick White with the canola growers, still calling for, saying that, as an organization, they want Carney over in China, meeting face to face. We did have, of course, a representative of Carney on this trip. Do you think it would make sense for Carney to go now? Is this a long tail kind of diplomacy? How do you see this shaping up?
Yeah, I think it is. There's a time and a place for a prime minister's visit to China that would be quite something, and the prime minister does not go to China unless it is the right time for the prime minister to go to China. And I expect when the time is right, he will be there. I think that there would probably be nobody happier to resolve the relationship and improve the relationship with China than Mark Carney is. I think Sean had a good interview this week with the head of the China Institute at the University of Alberta, where they talked about this as well. Again, I think there's a couple of things to note. As Kelvin pointed out, when the last agriculture minister went to China, he couldn't get any meeting with government officials at all. These are, I think, in the grand scheme of things, like relatively senior officials inside the Chinese government. I think that this is notable. And I think the other thing that's worth noting, and from domestic angle, is we had Cody Boyce, the Prime Minister's Parliamentary Secretary, and Scott Moe, the Premier of Saskatchewan, going to China together. I think that coordination is really important. We also saw Danielle Smith this week come out and say good things about a constructive meeting that she had with the Prime Minister, and I think that thawing of relations is a good thing. And we will only address these issues with China if we have Western provinces and the government of Canada working together. And they're clearly making this a priority. And I think that this is all progress. But this doesn't go away overnight. We know from what the experience Australia had with China, you can resolve all of the irritants. And China will take its time, and it will do what it needs to do when it feels like it's the right time to do it. And so that's where I don't think rushing Mark Carney to China is the solution yet, but these are all steps in the right direction.
And
now,
to me,
go ahead.
I just have an opinion here that I don't know if I see the resolution to this coming from a big, grand meeting between President Xi and Prime Minister Carney. I think it's a quiet regulatory notice posted on the Chinese Ministry of Commerce website in Mandarin that we have to translate to figure out, oh, hang on, they may have lifted the tariffs here. Like, I think that's the kind of way that this gets resolved, not a Trump-style summit between country leaders.
Which is, I mean, Kelvin, and thank you for checking that, because that's how we have found out other very large news, really, is that exactly that. It's just, it's a statement gets made, it gets posted, and they wait for media to find it and spread the word. I mean, that does seem to be how it has gone. Tyler, I did want to go back to you in listening to Philippe Rio's discussion. He talked about connecting agriculture to some other industry, not just making it about agriculture. Scott Moe, of course, from Saskatchewan with potash and other critical minerals, et cetera, from that province. Do you think that's a smart strategy, that it's not just about agriculture?
Yeah, I think that's often one of the traps that we fall into in agriculture, is that we think it's just about us. But these issues are never such. That's certainly not the case with how the Chinese government approaches things. It's not the case at the end of a trade agreement where we worry about beef getting traded off against dairy or whatever the case may be. These end up being economy-wide measures. The Chinese government, I think, does a really good job of looking across the relationship at potential irritants and potential solutions. And so I think it's not a surprise that that's kind of the best way to approach it. And I do think that China is one of those countries where on sometimes they do like to make a big deal out of a resolution of an issue, and you do get a big signing and there is a long list. But sometimes they also just want to resolve things quietly. And so that's, again, there's a time and a place for that. And the Chinese relationship is a delicate relationship that needs to be managed. We have not done a great job managing it. I think ultimately what this all hopefully points to is a more sophisticated foreign policy with the government of Canada. And we've been missing one of those. And so I think it's not easy with the U.S., with China, with everything else going on, but these are all kind of steps in the right direction.
Two quick points, too. I think we also need to look at our North American environment. We saw Mexico yesterday announce tariffs on Chinese vehicles coming into the country as well. So if we have Fortress North America being built here, Mexico put a big piece of that wall in place yesterday, or announced intent to do that. And that certainly will make it more difficult for the Canadian government to remove tariffs on Chinese EVs. And then we also have the U.S. or China refusing to buy soybeans from the U.S. And that certainly is also like that in terms of overall scale. That makes canola not look as big an issue. So that's something to pay attention to as well. And China is certainly coordinating, or China's, like Tyler said, China's watching all these different moving parts at the same time, and we need to in Canada as well.
And I think on that point, Kelvin, it's a very important one. Also looking at it from the perspective of sort of that quiet, as decisions are made, China has not made any big deal about not buying soybeans. They're just not buying them. So they're not stating this is some big trade war. They're not, there is no pomp and circumstance to this. They're just not buying. And so that is something I think that at times we have to navigate, is that sometimes you have to just pay attention to these things and what they infer, as opposed to something very direct of, a stated trade war or those sorts of things. Point. So it's a lot of moving parts that our governments and our industries are having to navigate as well. Now we have only a few minutes left in the show. We will have a bonus segment for all of you podcast downloaders. And if you're interested, head on over and download the podcast if you're listening on Rural Radio, channel 147. Bread price fixing scandal, Kelvin. If you're a Canadian and you bought bread since 2001, I think it's something ridiculous like that, you may be entitled to compensation Kelvin, what's this all about? And have you put in your name?
We actually did, yes, but I did feel a little bit. I was questioning whether I felt like I was giving them a lot of information just to get a potential gift card in the mail, and what are they going to do with this info? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, credit card number? No.
Yeah,
but I've forgotten more about this story than I remember, because this goes back such a long time.
Yeah,
with bread price fixing and the big companies, grocery companies in Canada, being caught with that, and it's taken this long to resolve. But yeah, there's this class action suit has come to a head, and now there's I don't know, are they sending out gift cards? They haven't actually said what they're, or e-transfers, I believe.
Yeah, so I did put my name in because I know for a fact that I bought bread in that time, because I have been an adult for a long time. But it comes from this class action lawsuit. If you were one of those people that put in for the $25 gift card from like the Loblaws company not that long, I think that's who it was, that apparently will be minused off what you may be entitled to from this compensation. So there is that to consider. At the same time, it all depends on how many people actually put in. So there has been a settlement, and then they will divvy that between all the people. But you're right, to put in for it, you have to give them a lot of information. But you don't necessarily have to show any sort of proof of you bought bread during this time. It's just, Tyler, from your perspective on like the food processing, the grocery side, the whatever, I mean, is it important that we all give them all our personal information for our $25? Or is this a lot of like, we're following the rules because we have to?
Well, so I feel like there's some legal questions there that I don't, I think you should always be careful with who you give your personal information to.
That
I feel
is
like
good advice.
That's probably the safe answer to that question. But I think one of the things that this is this kind of reminder of the issues that grocers have had in Canada. And I've kind of been a long kind of believer that these claims about greedflation that were such a big thing for a long time are overstated and not appropriate, and people kind of conflate things. But there clearly are issues from time to time with how the retail sector in Canada has worked, and clearly inappropriate things have happened. Mm-hmm. And so it is, if you bought bread, take advantage of the settlement, but don't expect that this is something that represents kind of you having to pay.
And it's a reminder of the accountability mechanisms in our industries maybe need to be quicker and more responsive too, in terms of maintaining trust and faith in food systems, essentially.
Yeah. Well, and also I find this sort of in the same line as, there was a class action lawsuit against Apple. If you had bought an iPhone of a certain model, you were entitled to, but like they needed like serial numbers and the whole bit. And anybody who recycles their electronics does not have that information anymore. So I do sometimes sort of question, I mean, it's important, I guess, that we do this. And when there is, a lawsuit that goes through, but at the same time, I don't know, it just feels like much ado about nothing. Anyway, they didn't ask you your blood type, Kelvin? No? Okay. Anyway, different questionnaire than I got. I'm just kidding. I'm making it worse than it is. Okay, stick around, everybody. We are, if you're listening to the podcast, we will have a bonus. Everyone else, though, join me in wishing Tyler a wonderful weekend. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Kelvin, I hope you stay dry this weekend.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
All right. Yes, thank you, of course. If you've got feedback on today's show, zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. I will be back, of course, for Monday's show. We'll talk to you then. Cheers, everybody. Well, welcome to the bonus segment for you podcast downloaders. We really do appreciate it. I've got Tyler McCann, Kelvin Heppner. We saved the best for last, let's say. Maybe not. This week, Tyler, one of the stories that we didn't get to on the show, we did see. So Sask Wheat has 2 brand new directors joining the board, 2 that are returning. All 4 were acclaimed. And Tyler, that made you scratch your head a little bit. Why?
Because I think that our farm organizations across the country are really important and should play a really big role. I remember for years when these were kind of big fights, especially in an organization like Sask Wheat, where people were clamoring to get on the board, where there was this real sense that the directors set the tone of the organization. And I think it says a lot at a time when we need, and farmers should be asking for more out of their associations, that there aren't people, kind of jumping over each other to try and sit on the board. Good credit to the 4 that have put their name forward and that were acclaimed. again, the kind of the time and effort that farmers volunteer to put into these organizations is incredibly valuable to the sector. But, we've got issues in associations across this country. And I think if we don't have good farmers putting their name forward and willing to kind of fight to get a position, it makes some of those issues potentially worse.
Kelvin, what do you experience in Manitoba as far as, is it still a challenge to find people to serve on boards?
I think it is. We have seen potentially fewer board seats that need filling here in our province because of the amalgamation into the Manitoba Crop Alliance. They still have committees that need people. I think the workload, maybe if you're on those committees, is less than being a full-fledged board member for an organization. They've taken out some of the redundancy that happened across all those boards, put that into one farm group. And I think that trend will continue as we see things like this, where the number of candidates, the number of farms out there, the number of people that have an understanding of the issues is not growing necessarily. And I think that's something that I feel like I'm encountering it more and more often, is people are intimidated by the technicality of agriculture and the level of detail of it, and how the expertise that's needed to really feel like you're confident in it. And I'm not sure how we address that issue in our industry. Do we not maybe be so hard on people that are new to the industry when they make rookie mistakes, that kind of thing, or show their greenness to the industry? But it's something that I think we're going to come up against more and more, both in terms of looking for employees in our industry, looking for people to serve on boards, people that are willing to put their name forward when we have an industry that is only becoming more technical and expertise requiring in terms of understanding how things work.
And Lyndsey, I think we have seen amalgamations in Manitoba, and I guess I continue to wait and wonder when we'll see more of that across the country, because that is another part of the solution. Is we probably need fewer organizations, and that's tough. And I know that we get into kind of differences or similarities, but there are ways that you can make these things work. We've seen it on the grain side in Ontario, in Manitoba, but I think in both of those provinces they could have gone further. We've seen it in Alberta, but again, it's only kind of 2 out of the 4 big groups in Alberta. So I think that the time, there's still a lot of opportunity to do more when it comes to amalgamation.
And I think that it does speak to, it is a huge undertaking to bring, several of these boards together. And we've seen that, when GFO was created and with the Manitoba Crop Alliance, et cetera. It does take skillful leadership of balancing, what everybody wants to see happen and the right personalities. And these are large undertakings, but I think to the point of, consolidation, generally speaking, it does sort of make sense that there are savings to be had for one thing. And also our human resource pool is not expanding necessarily. And it does take a time commitment. It also takes, there's a lot of training and personal development that has to happen when you serve on these boards, right? You need to understand how boards work. You need to there's usually a component of training involved, et cetera. And these are valuable skills, and but it is important work. And realistically, it's true. It's also demanding at times. You have to take time away from your family and your farm, et cetera. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of being more efficient and perhaps having that critical mass by having some of these groups join. I would be remiss if I didn't give a nod to my friend Jared Gust out in Saskatchewan. He was on the nominations committee for Sask Pulse, and he posted this week, so the same week that we got our acclamations with Sask Wheat, Sask Pulse is having, they've got several people in the running for director positions, so they are having an actual election there. So, it's not necessarily everywhere or in every group, but it is. I think every commodity sort of deals with this in a different way, and we need good people on these boards, and it is a really important job. So very cool. Kelvin, what story did we not talk about on today's show, or did we miss this week?
Oh, I don't know. We covered a lot of ground here.
We did. I'm so proud of us.
My notes here.
Yeah. Even when Sean's away, we can still manage some things. Yeah, maybe.
I think go ahead, Tyler.
I was going to say, I could go while Kevin comes up with
his
list. Because I think we may have referenced it, but on Monday or Tuesday, the Treasury Board president released a list of regulatory reform efforts that the government is going through. This was one of the big things that came out over the summer, that Prime Minister and the Treasury Board president went to ministers, went to everybody in cabinet and said, give us the list of things, or my read of it was, the way I would have described it was, give us the list of regulations you were going to change to get out of the way of average day Canadians. Show us how we're going to do things differently. And looking at what came out this week, I should have been using a very different tone and language to describe what the task was, because what they published was a list of 500 actions, but I think it was 500 examples of things that the government was doing already. It's not clear to me actually what's different as a result of all of this. There are clearly, I think, missed opportunities in agriculture to push further and further and harder, faster on regulatory reform efforts. This has been a priority for Minister McDonald. It's one of the things I think we've heard him say consistently that he wants to reduce regulatory burden on Canadians. And, I'm glad I wasn't holding my breath, because we're not there yet.
Kelvin?
Yeah, I agree. I looked through the list. It is a good inventory, again, of things that AFC and the CFIA are working on all in one place. We don't always get that type of transparency.
That's true.
But in terms of new information, not a whole lot new there. There was some indication of what they're doing on the cash advance file, which I wasn't fully aware of all the details there in terms of what the government was doing in terms of maybe making advance payments program process easier for producers. That was maybe one of the new things that was in there, but not a lot on livestock feed ingredient approval, red tape, things like that too, where, like Tyler said, Minister McDonald's been talking about, and they even talked about it at the FPT meeting, red tape reduction, and how they received updates on the progress there as well. But like this report showed, not a lot. And if we are holding our breath, I guess we continue to wait for the federal budget and news to break around that. But again, a lot of things coming to a head on that front.
To put everybody on the spot, do we have a date for the budget yet or not yet? We have to wait.
I think there was.
Yeah.
I think the answer is no, but
the last I heard, it was supposed to be early in this parliamentary session. It was the last I had sort of heard. But what does early mean? Government has its own timeline, everybody. So yeah.
And I think early October is what they're talking now. So I don't think there's a hard.
Okay, there's not a hard date yet. Okay, well we'll keep tabs on that. All right, we're gonna wrap this up. Oh, Kelvin,
I did come up with one. I was just going to quickly say this China not buying soybeans out of the U.S.
Yes.
I think not only impacts U.S. farmers and especially farmers in the northern plains and western growing areas, because the PNW rail system and the whole logistic supply chain to the PNW is underutilized now. I think it's also affecting us north of the border here in Canada because of the basis and just we grow a lot of soybeans here in southern Manitoba as well. Sure, nothing compared to the Corn Belt in the U.S., but those soybeans now have to compete against landlocked soybeans in North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota as well. Yes. So I think that this is an issue that is also impacting farmers north of the border. It's a U.S. story mainly. We haven't maybe talked about it here as much, but I think it's something that we should be paying attention to north of the border as well.
But I think we often think about these things as a U.S. story, but not just because, again, it's not just the Canadian canola prices, but the whole oilseed complex is impacted by what's happening on U.S. prices. But it is just this real reminder, right, that these are global issues, that this is not, again, if you go back to Canada and China and canola, that's part of it. But the Chinese government is looking at its oilseed demand and is looking at where it can get it. We refer to it as an opportunistic buyer. If it could not get the soybean out of South America, it would be looking at North America to get it. But it also kind of reinforces, I think, that this idea that the risks that farmers are facing is much more global and much more complex than we sometimes admit and think that they are. And so it is really important to understand what are these broader forces that are happening. And I think there's some people would say they haven't bought U.S. soybeans yet, right? There is a sense that they can't go on forever. If you look at how this has played out in the past, right? We've seen some of this analysis this week, but farmers need to be thinking much more, I think, broadly if they really want to get an understanding about what does price volatility look like, what does it mean for them going forward.
North Dakota. No. So, well, I was just going to say, and at some point, and this is a very uncomfortable conversation to have, China, total volumes may drop over time as to what their base need is. So we have to remember
their population,
right?
Reflecting their population situation as well.
So it isn't, you can't just build in they had this much last year, they're going to need that much plus this year. It doesn't work that way. There is the potential that the total demand year over year is going to decline. So where does that all go? Kelvin, go ahead.
North Dakota State University has an excellent report out this week, their ag trade monitor, that talks about infrastructure going underutilized in the Pacific Northwest, and the longer that they don't buy these soybeans, the more that the railways and the port facilities pivot to other commodities. That's or they take capacity off that supply chain and move it elsewhere. And so the longer, and just like the first Trump administration, when it really forced China to buy from South America, the longer it lasts, the longer it takes for that demand to come back, because trade flows shift and there's resistance to coming back.
That's right. Once trade flows change, it's not like overnight everything goes back to how it was. Like some trade flows are sticky and they stay. Even once maybe diplomatic relations change, certain percentages anyway will stay going that way. Tyler, you had one last point before we sign on?
Yeah, because I think that this came up in the conversation Sean had about China this week as well, but I think that there's this sense, and sometimes that we live in this divided world where there's kind of China and its allies on one side and the US and Europe and Canada and others on the other side. And I think I've always thought of, food is different, right? Because there is only so much production on one of those sides and kind of the demand is on the other. And so these things line across. But again, I think we're seeing today that may not always be true. There may be situations actually where there isn't that need for food security to cross. But yeah, I think it's still a big question mark. I think that there is the sense that that only gets you so far. There does need to be back and forth. And so I think it just speaks to the kind of geopolitical nature of food. And as much as we think it's kind of global S&D, it's messy and it's complicated.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Okay, we'll leave it there. Kelvin, Tyler, thank you so much for joining me here
on
the bonus segment.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.